continues to be an important topic across the world because the populations must be fed, and the governments around the globe understand that this must be achieved. The war in Ukraine, global warming, drought, and various other factors continue to affect the strive to feed the global population. But even as we continue to seek for solutions, what scientific options are there to be explored? Are they being consumed as expected? I will be having this conversation with Dr. Sheila Ochugboju, Executive Director for the Alliance for Science, a global communications initiative based at the Boyce Thompson Institute. Karibu sana.
Asante sana.
I'm hoping that I pronounced your name well.
You did. Thank you so much.
Yes, so as we continue to have conversations around food security, we tend to ask, how do we get to feed the population that is always growing? And therefore, now the question comes, food has to be grown, farmers have to be empowered. And there are other scientific options that we haven't yet absorbed as Africans, which brings me to my first question. What exactly is gene editing?
Gene editing is an amazing new technology that thankfully is being adopted in Africa, not as rapidly as we would like, but it's gaining traction. So gene editing is where you are making precise changes in the genome of an organism, and those precise changes can confer benefits such as drought resistance, or it can make it tolerant, a crop tolerant to high salt in the soil, and it can also make it much more sustainable use of water, so that you're growing more crops on less land, but you're doing it much more sustainably, so you're having less effect on the land. So this technology allows us to make the kinds of changes that plant breeders would perhaps take 50, 60 years of crossbreeding, and then not able even to do it precisely, because when you crossbreed, you get one thing you want and maybe two things you don't want, and then you keep on going until you get to a place where you're happy. But with gene editing, very precise editing, just like scissors, you cut out what you don't want and you move on.
So how does gene editing fit into the larger topic of biotechnology?
Well, gene editing is one of the technologies now that is at the cutting edge of biotech, and it's one that we're promoting, and it's very much, the research is being done on the continent. We at the Alliance for Science work very closely with the IITA, the International Institute for Tropical Agriculture, which is based right here on the campus here. And we work with other international institutes that work on maize and wheat. So the scientists here are looking at what are the crops that we most need, that we most consume, that are most useful for us, and how can this technology be applied to the crops that we care about: cassava, cowpeas, maize, bananas, and beginning to look at pest resistance, drought resistance, and those things to increase productivity. Because as you said, we need to increase productivity. We need to intensify agriculture because we have many mouths to feed, and we need to do so despite the fact that climate change is causing ravages on our soil.
Then the conversation comes, in Kenya specifically, there has been conversation around genetically modified organisms.
Yes.
So what is genetically modified organisms, and how is it different from gene editing?
Yes, genetically modified organisms have been around for about 30 years. In fact, when I started my scientific career, when I had my PhD about 25, 30 years ago, I was working on genetically modified organisms, and we were looking at the same kinds of questions as we are now. How can we reduce pests? How can we reduce pesticide usage, which is making soils toxic? So we were modifying organisms, GMOs, and there was a misunderstanding at that time. There were many misunderstandings, and because science communication was beginning to create that space for dialogue with the public, so people were very afraid of foreign organisms being inserted into foreign materials. So you're bringing something that that is not normally in a crop from another crop. So people were somewhat cautious about that. Gene editing, in many ways, it doesn't have that, because what you're doing is precisely editing what's already there. You're not introducing foreign material, so it doesn't have the same kind of stigma, or it doesn't make people feel so worried. So gene editing has, at this moment, been taken up much more rapidly than GMOs, which sadly, because I think we should look at GMOs again, there's still a lot of caution.
Well, when we talk about gene editing, there is the aspect of it being introduced in agriculture. We agree it's important. How then do we convince farmers and governments that they need to come on board on it?
You know, farmers are businessmen. Farmers are actually the people that they're not as hard to convince, because farmers understand what they need. They know they need better seeds. They know they need better inputs. They know what the challenges are with pests. They know that spraying a crop 3, 4, 5 times is not great for them, their family, and their soil. So they know that. They're looking for solutions. Farmers have always been much more savvy than we give them credit for. Governments, on the other hand, because politics comes into it, culture comes into it, so science is just a tiny part of the conversation. So we generally get shoved out of the way in terms of other concerns. But now we're beginning to engage governments much more consistently. And we've had successes in Nigeria where the government, because we said, okay, you want your public to feel safe. We want people to feel safe as well. So what government can do is to develop a framework, a biosafety framework. So government is there for governance. So you need a good governance framework so that you can be sure what's coming on the market is safe, the consumer can be sure, and you have a way of regulating, mitigating, and being sure that anybody who abuses that, that there are repercussions. So governments are beginning to do that, and we are helping to share good practices in terms of biosafety protocols. What are the things you really need to look out for? And how do you get a crop to be licensed in a country? How do you license the different aspects of the research? And then when it goes to market, what are your surveillance mechanisms? So we've helped Nigeria, which pioneered really in allowing gene editing crops in, and so they passed their safety regulations in February, and then Kenya in March, and about 5 crops. We're very excited because it's not just about it's the fact that African scientists are on the leading edge of change for food security across the world. We're not the only ones that eat cowpea. We're not the only ones that eat cassava. The rest of the world does. So if we make it better for them, the rest of the world has Africa to thank.
So now, scientists have existed even before gene editing was there, but we found that right now, more focus have gone into now embracing gene editing and the use of GMOs. So why are we leaning more towards the scientific approach as opposed to back in the days when we just wait? Where is the wind coming from? When is it going to rain for us to start preparing our lands to prepare? So why the change?
Well, firstly, the world is a lot bigger than it ever was in history. We have a lot more mouths to feed, and by 2050, we'll have 10 billion mouths to feed. And in a country like Nigeria, where I come from, where we're currently 220 million, we will soon be 300 million. We cannot have young people coming into a continent that cannot produce food to feed them. That's a dangerous thing for the continent. It's dangerous for the world, for Africa to be hungry. And 80% of people who are suffering from challenges of hunger are also now suffering from challenges of climate change. So that climate change we now understand, the science allows us to understand it better. So we know that when before we could say the short rains come now, the long rains come now, and you could plan when to plant, when to harvest, I think all farmers know now that that's out of the window. We're seeing from the droughts that the seasons have changed so dramatically, and the extreme weather events are so severe that you now have to say, number one, you need better forecasting, yes, and science can help in that. But number two, we know that some things we can't change. We're going to have more floods. We're going to have more extreme weather events. So what are we going to do? Because we still have to grow crops and we still have to eat. So science can accelerate how we solve that problem. And we have to accelerate it. We don't have decades of crossbreeding to be able to get resistant crops, resistant to drought. And some of the challenges we face, we have never faced them in the volume, like you're having swarms of locusts, and then you're having droughts, and then you're having floods. I mean, it's almost biblical, the kinds of challenges African countries are having. So we need some kind of divine and scientific intervention.
People are saying it is end times, but when we talk about gene editing, specifically for, say, animals, how does it have any effect when we consume it? Because people would argue, first of all, it is not godly. It is scientists doing their thing. But does it have any effect when you consume genetically edited animals and crops?
Well, the kinds of research that is being done specifically in Kenya for pigs and cattle is really to vaccinate, to create vaccines against diseases so that the productivity can go up. So in the same way as we're taking vaccines so that we don't fall prey to diseases, animals also need those vaccines so that they are healthy and safe. But all of these concerns can be mitigated by having a good governance system, but also looking at the history of genetic technology, of biotech. You know, it has been phenomenally safe. And the fact is, it has more precision in that we know what is in the crop and what has changed and what hasn't changed, in ways that often we don't know with conventional plant breeding, because you just know from what shows up. You don't really know from the precision of which you are actually intentionally making a change. So I would reassure people that scientists are very cautious. First of all, you can't be a good scientist if you're slapdash. So, and also that governments are extremely cautious, African governments. But we do not have time to waste. We've had COVID, we've had climate change, we now have the conflict in Ukraine, we're seeing increased food prices, and that's not going to get better in a short time.
All right.
The effects are likely to get worse.
So now, when you talk about gene editing for crops and livestock, there is a constituency that consume the products and those that grow them. So that means the farmers and us, people who eat. So then, how do we encompass these both sides into these conversations for them, number one, to see the benefits of genetically edited products and how this in the long run becomes a solution moving forward? Because like you said, we have locusts, we have floods, and many other calamities that are happening.
Yes.
How do we convince them that, this is the way to go and this is how to go about it?
To be honest, farmers, as I said, farmers are they're highly intelligent and they're highly responsive to solutions. They know how hard it is to be a farmer. And we at Alliance for Science engage farmers across the continent, and we've done so for the last 8 years. In Nigeria, we start with listening to the farmers. So in Nigeria, it is the farmers that are asking us, do you have anything for this? And I know that in Kenya, when I was here a few years ago, it was the fall armyworm, and farmers were just looking right, left and center for, does anybody have a solution to this? So farmers are looking for solutions, and if you can show them something that works, they're much more they're happy to move ahead. And we engage them here in Kenya. So we work with farmer communities as our primary constituency. We have Alliance for Science Fellows who are all across Africa, and they specifically target their science communication to their communities, meaning they answer the questions that are being asked of them. And we are also in Asia. We have Farming Future Bangladesh. I'll be going to Bangladesh next week to engage with that community. So in the same way as you do here in Kenya, where you have lots of farm radio, you have TV shows, you have events, we are on the ground engaging at that level. That's where most of our resources go.
And finally, my final question would be, what is the future of gene editing?
Well, I hope that the future is that we're able to see the benefits in the sustainable agricultural intensification of Africa. So we hope that gene editing will be taken up, and because when a technology is taken up, it allows innovation to move to the next step. When I started in science, at the leading edge at that time of GMOs, it's taken this long for us to get to where we are now, mostly because of resistance. Resistance to allow us to experiment, even to do in the lab or in field trials. So I'm hoping that very, very quickly, many of the things that we've had from time immemorial, drought, pesticide accumulation, all of those things, that the technology will have answers to it, but also provide answers to other things that we're worried about, like plastics. So biotech also helps us to think about ways of digesting plastics and basically helping most of the environmental concerns that people are talking about every day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
most
much.
Definitely this conversation must continue. I was speaking to Dr. Sheila Ochugboju. That is a good name. I think it will go into my diaries. It's a good one. Maybe my kids would have one. But definitely this conversation must continue, and we urge farmers out there to come on board and embrace genetic editing, because the world has to eat. And it is that conversation that will definitely brings Africa Speaks to an end. My name is Dennis Aseto. Enjoy the rest of your viewing. Good afternoon.